Good morning. On behalf of the faculty and staff of the Diedrich College of Communication, I'd like to welcome you to the 2015 annual conference of the O'Brien Fellowship in Public Service Journalism. Before we get going today on this great conference, I want to acknowledge and introduce some guests here today. We have with us 4 members of the Diedrich family. And their wonderful parents, Bill and Mary Diedrich, gave us $28 million and endowed our college and enabled us to transform the way we educate our students in the field of journalism and communication. I'm also very happy to welcome and acknowledge Pat and Pete Frechette, who are the benefactors and are responsible for this wonderful fellowship and the conference that we are having today. So I'd like to welcome both families here and thank you for being with us today. We are about to start a wonderful day-long conversation about in-depth investigative journalism that is world-changing. It changes the nature of the conversation, it changes how we think about our world, and I personally think it has a direct impact on how we think about democracy and citizenship. And our fellows that you will be hearing from today and the students get to tell their stories about how these wonderful pieces of reporting came to be. I would like to encourage all of the people who are here today to be sure to engage in social media and tweet and email about what they're doing using MU O'Brien, at MU O'Brien, and hashtag MU O'Brien. And I want you all to just really kind of immerse yourself in today. The way we're going to do it is we've got some students introducing some of our speakers, and I would like to introduce our first student who will introduce our session, and that is Theresa Solely. Theresa joined up with Brandon during her second semester of graduate school in our program, and the best outcome of that experience was her front page Sunday splash about her time in the Journal Sentinel about her time in Peru. And so this is pretty cool to have a graduate student with a front page story on a major newspaper, and that happened because of her time at the Journal Sentinel. So I would like to have you all welcome Theresa Solely. You get a mic. There you go.
All right. Hi, guys. My name is Theresa Solely. I'm a graduate student here at Marquette, and I was lucky enough to work with Brandon last semester. So it was a year ago that I was sitting at not one of these tables. I think it was round, and it was in the Union. But I picked up one of those triangular papers, and I saw Brandon's name on it, and his job title was listed as an environmental reporter. And I was like, I think I want that to be my job title. I think that's my dream job. So I introduced myself to Brandon eventually, and we got to work together. And I also read that he had done some reporting in Alaska, and I also have an extreme interest in Alaska and consider Alaska to be my home now. So I was really lucky to work with him because we do have a lot in common. And I think the topic of his reporting, water scarcity, I think the environmental topics that Brandon is interested in are really quite important. I've heard people argue that environmental issues are really the root of a lot of our social issues and our social problems in society. And so I think it's really great to dig a little bit deeper and start looking at some of these environmental issues, which often are overlooked in the media. So yeah, I was lucky enough to go to South America with Brandon. He's going to tell you all about his work in the Southwest as well as in South America. But I do have a little story from South America that I'll share with you guys. So Brandon and I went from Peru into Bolivia, and we were staying in La Paz, and his hotel was right across the street from mine. So he came over and met me, and he was sitting in a couch, and I sat down in a chair next to him, and Brandon said, "I have a problem." And I looked at him kind of funny, and I was like, okay, Brandon, what's this problem? He was like, well, when I'm reporting in the field, I have hyper observation mode on constantly. I notice every detail. I am very, on high alert the entire time I'm working. And I looked at him kind of funny, and I was like, I'm not sure that's a problem. I think that sounds like a really great journalist. So that really kind of stuck out to me as a quality of a good journalist is being very observational. And the reason he described it as a problem was because he was getting tired, because he couldn't turn it off. But anyway, I would like to introduce a very talented reporter that I was fortunate to work with last semester, Brandon Loomis, up here to speak with you guys. Tell us about his work.
Thank you. Yeah. Actually, I think if there's a problem with it, it's more that I do turn it off. So when I stop working, I don't notice anything, which is true. But, and Theresa turned out to be obviously a great self-starter, and I didn't really arrange her work in Peru. She managed to find people there, and if you've read the story, obviously she made it happen. So I think it was a good experience for everyone. So, why are we here this morning? Why am I so worked up about the Snake River, or I used to work in Idaho, the Colorado River? Because that's my drinking water. I love this picture. I didn't ever see it until last week. It was apparently, it ran with the first story in the series back in March. But I still haven't even seen the paper because I was still here when it ran. So I just saw this last week. Our photographer, Mark Henley, took it. It's at Lake Mead, which is on the Colorado River. The reason I like it is that, well, first of all, this guy's awesome. He's like, I don't know if you can tell, but he's drinking like a mini bottle of rosé, and he's smoking a cigarette. And you can see this is where our water used to be up to. So even though I know he's just trying to beat the heat, it's kind of like, it just puts me in the mind of, fiddling while Rome burns, right? Which I hope is not what people will be doing once they read the stories. So I'm going to start this off with kind of the way I started the series, which is with some background about where our water is and why we're facing some difficulties today. This is Hoover Dam, which forms Lake Mead and provides our water. For Phoenix, the Colorado River is about 40% of our water. And for the region as a whole, from Colorado to Los Angeles, the river provides water for about 40 million people. And our region is projected to grow by somewhere between 10, depending on how the economy does, somewhere between 10 and 35 million people over the next 50 years, if we have water. And it seems apparent that unless we change how we use water, we won't have enough water for that kind of growth. But as I'll point out, I think there's a lot of room for adaptation and change. But obviously, unlike here in Milwaukee or the Midwest at large, we can't tap the Great Lakes. We can't count on plentiful aquifers to tap into with wells. We keep our water here in these big reservoirs, Lake Mead and Lake Powell. They store several years' worth of the river's flow. But they're declining, obviously. Here again, you see this is what we call the bathtub ring, where the water used to come up to. 3 years ago, the government did some projections about, if we continue to grow, what our shortage will be like in the Colorado River Basin. And they determined that it's likely to be about 3.2 million acre feet by 2060. An acre foot is how we measure water in the West. It's the amount of water that it takes to cover 1 acre to 1 foot depth. It's 326,000 gallons. And because we use more water outdoors, we have to water lawns and so on, it's about how much it takes to supply 2 households in our region. So we're talking about 6 million households that we'd be short of water if we didn't change how we use this water in the future, and more than that in terms of people, millions of people. The trouble with our shortage projections is that they're based mostly on population projections and on demand, not on weather and climate. And these people are taking a selfie on the dam. I don't know if they're afraid of water scarcity. They're probably acting like they're falling off the dam. But you can see, this is the bathtub ring. This water has dropped. These reservoirs, Lake Mead and Lake Powell, are half full, which has never happened before since they filled them. We've been dealing with drought for 15 years in the region, and we thought we were going to face shortage in Arizona out of Lake Mead and the Colorado River this year. The way it works is when that water drops to a certain level, certain elevation, there's a trigger point that now restrictions are on, and in Arizona, we happen to have junior rights to California, so we take the first hit. And for us, it's a couple 100,000 acre feet, I think. It's not enough at that first level of shortage to affect us in the cities, but it would shut down some farms in central Arizona. We avoided that because we did get down to the trigger point, but you have to be there at the start of what they call the water year, and it rebounded just, at the end of the summer, it rebounded just slightly, enough to get over that level. And with some collaborative conservation going on between the states, the thinking is that it won't happen next year either, but probably in 2017. But this is not really where our water comes from. This is the Colorado Rockies. This particular point, if you're a skier, is Arapahoe Basin, west of Denver. This is a snow scientist that we went out with. He goes around the state measuring snow conditions and kind of predicting the runoff for people who rely on it. This was in April. But our river comes from this snow when it melts. From the Colorado Rockies up through eastern Utah, up along the Green River into Wyoming near Grand Teton National Park. This is what we depend on throughout the Southwest and into Mexico. So while I wanted to, or needed to, present kind of the mechanics of Lake Mead and what we're facing, I also, my central point really was I wanted to show what's happening in the mountains and why our river is likely to diminish permanently, and why our expectations for water security in the future may be too optimistic, and what we can do about it. This is in western Colorado, above the Gunnison River, another place that water flows into the Colorado. So the science on climate and snow in the Rockies is that naturally warmth changes some of the snow into rain. So in the fall and the spring, more rain, less snow. And you'd think that, well, so what? That's going to flow downhill and get into the reservoirs. But the reality is that it's warmer, it's more likely to evaporate. Because the ground's not snow covered, there's a longer growing season for trees, for grasses, and they're demanding more water. Some of the snow, because it's warmer, it's actually going straight from snow to gas. And so there's a lot of work going on right now trying to quantify how much is this reducing and how much will it reduce the river. And the U.S. Interior Department did a study kind of looking at the mid-range of studies a few years ago and decided that the likeliest outcome was that the Colorado River would decline by 9% by mid-century. Some of the scientists that I talked to at the University of Colorado who are working on snow science believe that that's optimistic, that their models, assuming that climate change continues, that kind of business as usual greenhouse gases, more like 20% reduction, which is kind of crazy to think about when we're already You know, every drop of the river is used today, and we want to grow, or we need it to grow. At the University of Arizona, there was kind of an analysis of the best science out there, all the studies, and they determined there's a wide range of possibilities, ranging from a 5% reduction in the river to 35%. So it's kind of hard to say exactly where it's going to come down, but even if it's 5%, that's 5% of water that we don't have to give right now, and we're adding millions of people. So clearly, one way or the other, we need to take that into account with how we're living. Part of the issue, a big part, is agriculture. Ranchers up and down the river, and this one is near Steamboat Springs, Colorado, either directly or indirectly use about half of the river's flow. Half the river goes to pasture or irrigated alfalfa, hay. So one way or the other, it's going to livestock. And much of this irrigation, like in this case, he's at the headwaters, and it's flood irrigation. So he has this canal that his grandfather built, and he opens it with a shovel, and it floods down the hill onto his hay. And he does this every spring. And in his case, there's not much you could really do differently. The terrain at his ranch is not. You couldn't really install drip irrigation or even center pivots to become more efficient. So he's actually really worried that in the future, when water gets more expensive, and he may have to sell out and not be able to turn the ranch over to his daughter. But across the basin, there's opportunity to partner with ranchers where if they would be willing, they're very skeptical to begin with. You know, they have water that belongs to them. Anything that goes past their ranch that they're not using, they're concerned that goes away forever. So it's something that takes a lot of negotiation, but there's an emerging thought that there will be partnerships where maybe the city of Phoenix, maybe Los Angeles, others will pool their money and basically buy the equipment that would make these ranches more efficient. And then the water comes to us. It's not just ranchers, it's also any kind of farming. More than 2/3 of the water in the Colorado River goes to farming of one kind or another. So obviously a large pool to draw from if there's a way to do it without putting people out of business, people who don't want to be put out of business. It's already happening to some extent. I should probably back up. The biggest transfer that's happened so far is for San Diego. They've bought some of the Colorado River water from the Imperial Irrigation District, which is a big one in Southern California. And those farmers didn't want to give up land. They didn't want to stop farming. But San Diego pays them to put concrete in the canals so they don't leak so much. They're starting to work on getting irrigation systems that are more efficient, and that's coming from San Diego, and then San Diego gets that water. That's kind of the way things seem to be going. Arizona we're not using water like that, but we're experimenting with a system where the Central Arizona Project pays fruit farmers in Yuma to fallow some fields that if they're going to cut the trees down anyway to plant again, give them a year off, and we'll just see how much water that saves. And maybe in the future there's an opportunity to pump that water to the city. One of the interesting and kind of weird twists of this story is in dust. This is what's called cryptobiotic soil outside of Moab, Utah. It's a combination of bacteria, it's alive, in some cases lichens, but it's basically the whole arid West was blanketed with this stuff before settlement. And anything that's between clumps of grass or trees or just bare dirt had this crust on it. And when you walk on it, you crush it, And so over the years, with the introduction of livestock grazing, recreation, all the dirt roads that we have, energy development, and drought's drying it out, this stuff has really taken a beating. And when it does, well, here this is an example of how the kind of tendrils of the stuff hold the dirt together. But when it does get exposed like this is right outside of Arches National Park. It's kind of an exaggerated example, but people are always playing on this hillside, and it's there's some human impact there. And now it's open to wind erosion. And where does it go? To the Rocky Mountains. And it ends up on the snow. And that's darker than the snow, obviously, and it absorbs solar radiation, and it melts the snow faster than it did in the past. And again, you think, well, so what? It's melting the snow's going to go down, but all the same processes are at work. Now you have snow cover for less time, you have more demand from the trees, all of that is happening. And so at the University of Colorado, they've tried to quantify what the effect of just the dust has been, not temperatures, just the melt that happens because of the dust. And they're figuring, first of all, the snow melt now comes 3 weeks earlier just because of dust than it did mid-1800s. And they figure that accounts for a 5% loss in the Colorado River today. This is when the snow scientist that we were out with, this is what he does. He digs these pits, and you can see the layer of dust. There was one windstorm event, and then there was a new snow deposit on top of it. And what happens is when spring comes, it melts off that top. Now it really starts to melt on that one, and it kind of comes down and compresses until you've got dust that's just, before it was spread out, now it's just on the surface really absorbing radiation. This is the video I wanted to show to explain the stuff.
For us Arizonans, this is where much of our water comes from. Snow falls high in the Rockies, melting and forming small streams. They meet to form larger ones, and further on till joining into the upper basin of the Colorado River.
So it's of great concern to just about anybody in the West what happens into the upper basin water supply.
That starts with the farmers and ranchers that work the land where the snow falls and it all begins.
We know it's dry. We have, snow melting off early. Temperatures are higher than usual right now. The conversation really comes more of how are we going to survive this.
The Rossi family has been ranching the Yampa Valley of northern Colorado for nearly a century.
It goes back to the early 20s when my grandpa finally was able to quit working cattle ranches and buy a start for himself.
Philip's daughter Olivia is 9 years old. She knows her way around the ranch.
To get to the goal of her ranching, it's going to take a lot of wise decisions and a lot of good fortune. Hopefully, with the importance of water, that doesn't become the defining moment of you have to sell the place because you can't afford to run the ranch.
We're seeing in a warmer world that runoff is happening sooner, so boom, quick runoff and done.
For ranchers like Philip, this is a problem, as the water is coming at a time when they can't really use it to grow crops. And in late spring, when they really need it, it's gone. It's not just higher temperatures that are causing this earlier runoff.
One of the main issues that we have in the upper Colorado basin is dust on snowpack. It increases the heat load on that snowpack. The snow's going to melt faster than the water enters the streams and the rivers all at once.
As water is heading down from Colorado to Arizona, the dust is moving in the opposite direction.
There are a few source places where it's just constantly producing dust. A lot of it is the Navajo Nation. That fine sand is just something that blows if you just look at it. Then the wind will carry soil particles to the nearest obstruction, and that nearest obstruction will be the mountains.
Climate change was not on our radar way back when I was 20.
Chris Landry is a pioneering extreme skier. In 1981, he was quoted in Sports Illustrated. The definition of extreme skiing is pretty simple. If you fall, you die. Now, as a snow scientist, he skis into Colorado's backcountry not for thrills, but to monitor the presence of dust on snow.
This is a change that has occurred in my lifetime, that as a longtime ski mountaineer, having never observed the kind of dust on snow that we're seeing, it's alarming and interesting. We're adding our tiny, small little piece to the puzzle by trying to understand dust on snow.
The demand for water and the availability of water are out of balance.
John Harold is known as the sweet corn king for revolutionizing that crop in Colorado. He also raises cattle and grows grain for the Coors Brewing Company.
We don't have enough water to meet the demands. So how do you balance that? You pray, seed the clouds, put a funnel to the sky, or you use less water and relative to efficiencies. Water, in my mind, in 10 years, maybe 15, will be more valuable than gold. So it's a resource that we can't live without. Our problem is that we've had plentiful water for such a long time that we don't understand the value of water yet, but we will one day.
That was the voice of David Wallace, a photographer for the Arizona Republic, which is one of the really nice things about this fellowship, is that we were able to leverage my travel. All the places that I went, there's no way that a photographer could have come along as well, but the paper was in for that much, and it really was a big help. He's really good at, obviously, photos, but also video. And speaking of the travel, we wanted to show that we were not in this alone, that other parts of the world that have arid climates that rely on mountains, rely on snow melt and ice melt from the mountains, have the same issues that we have, and in a lot of ways have it worse because they don't have the ability or resources to adapt as we do. We went to Peru. This is a glacier that's been retreating rapidly in a national park there. It's called the Pastorori Glacier. It's kind of a famous one. This is the Cordillera Blanca, part of the Andes, that has the world's largest concentration of tropical glaciers because it's so high. And tropical glaciers, where they feed rivers that flow onto dry areas like this. Peru is basically the part that flows toward the coast. That's all arid, but the part that flows the other way goes to the Amazon. But it's the arid part where all the people live in Peru. Lima has 10 million people, and it's relying on these rivers that are coming out of the mountains. And these glaciers in the Cordillera Blanca have receded by at least a quarter since I was in college in the 1980s. And they'll be gone probably, give it about that much more time, they might be gone. So we met a scientist down there from Ohio State University who works on these issues, and he's in the middle there. He's gauging stream flow in the headwater streams. His name's Brian Mark. They're trying to figure out, he and others, trying to figure out what the effect is on the rivers. And the way it works is this is from glaciers rather than annual snowmelt. And Peru basically has half the year is a dry season. They get no rain at all. So half the year they're okay on their rivers, and the other half they rely on what's melting off the glaciers. And then during the wet season, it kind of piles back onto the glaciers. So it's this cycle that's been going on forever that feeds the rivers. These headwater streams, you can imagine that when the glaciers start melting, they actually kind of rise a bit. But some of these have now crested and are on the way back down. So it's a permanent reduction once they hit that point. And Brian figures his work and work he's done with others, they figure that the loss of these glaciers means a 30% reduction in these headwater streams flows, which is not, it doesn't mean a 30% reduction for the river that goes to Lima or to the coastal farms, but it's more like 10 or 15%. But that 30% is coming at a time of year where it's crucial. And the problem for them is that they don't have any reservoirs. They don't have any way of storing it the way we do. They want to, the government wants to build some, but I don't know that they have the resources. And also, this is a hugely active earthquake zone, so they're not sure how to do it safely either. This is Lima, which is a crazy place. It's 10 million people. It feels like 30 because the traffic is horrendous. If you thought Chicago or Los Angeles was bad, you try to take a cab across town and it's like, you know, an 8-lane highway becomes like 16 because nobody follows any rules. It's like they're just trying to squeeze through, around. It takes hours to get across town. So we were lucky that we didn't spend very much time there. But Lima, I'm sorry, Peru. But the reason I show it is that it's growing because people from the mountains who are losing water and have other economic issues happening, they come to the city looking for work, and it's going to keep growing, and the demand for water there is going to be rising. We visited a neighborhood there. They have just miles of suburban slums up on the hills. There's no rain, there's no running water, and there's a group there that's installing, they look like volleyball nets, but they're mesh that catches fog off the ocean and drips it into a bucket, you know, down. And it's actually enough, if you have one of these, apparently during the right season, it's enough that you can have drinking water. But the point is, what's happening in the mountains affects Lima because not only is it their water, but it's also sending people. This is to give you an idea of what the coast looks like, how dry it is. It's up and down the coast there. This is north of Lima. I mean, it makes Arizona look like a jungle. There's just there's actually never any rain there on the coast. This is a guy we met who's fixing his fishing net. So obviously they need the rivers, because if you're buying asparagus from Peru in the winter, or mangoes or avocados, this is the part of Peru that it's coming from. But the biggest impacts from the loss of water in the mountains is going to be on the traditional farmers who, you know, basically subsistence farmers who lived there. For one thing, they don't have water rights in the way that we do. They've never restricted who uses what. They've started registering people so they know who's taking water, but they don't have laws that say this is your water. And so you know that the people on the coast, the cities, more powerful centers, there were Americans we talked to down there drew a parallel between Los Angeles and the rural West, where Los Angeles has its act together, has the money and the political power. Lima has the political power. These people have just been farming up there for hundreds of years, and they had water, and so why would they need to own it? It's just there, they use it, but they may need to own it in the future, and they don't. So this guy's growing kind of like a lima bean. It's obviously a cornfield there, but he's got them planted in among there. It's also the area that these guys are growing quinoa, potatoes. It's the culture that gave us potatoes, and they're growing just all kinds of kinds of potatoes that we don't even know about, and yet they're already feeling that they're running out of water, and they know about what's happening with the glaciers. I'm not sure a lot of them that we talked to understood why it was happening. When I asked them about fossil fuels, for instance, they thought I was asking about them burning their fields every year. Was that causing the problem? And it's like, no, I don't think it's you. Don't worry. But they understand that their water is disappearing, and everyone that we talked to up there either had children who had moved to Lima, or they knew people who were moving to Lima, and they were concerned that their culture was in trouble. We also went to Bolivia. This is La Paz. That mountain in the background, I think, is Illimani. The people who live by it call it the water bearer. Same reason that they're high elevation there. They have glaciers. The glaciers feed the rivers. There's another mountain nearby where it had the world's highest ski chairlift until 2009, when the glacier that it was on disappeared. So these glaciers are disappearing rapidly. We went there to visit. We wanted to tell the story about how climate change and water scarcity, it's sort of obvious, but it has the most effect on people who have the fewest resources to adapt. And so we learned that in a growing suburb of La Paz, there were people without water, or people who had water but relied on a river that was tied into glacier melt. And this is somebody who moved into La Paz from the mountains, got a job making, or I'm not sure if he had a job or if he just makes shoes and sells them, but they build these brick shacks on the hillside, and they don't have water at their homes, so they have like a few community taps that they walk to and fill up, and then go back to their place and put in tanks or buckets or what have you. They don't have a bathroom. They go to the river down below where they live. Some people are lucky enough to have their own tap. They're generally in the backyard rather than in the house. But this is tied to the water system that's coming from the mountains, and 20% of that is glacier melt. And these glaciers will be gone by 2045, so that's 20% of their water will be gone. And the concern is that there's more and more people, again, moving into the city kind of because they need to, and there's going to be a diminishing water where these people already are kind of strapped for having water. So we toured this neighborhood with a nonprofit group that is helping people establish rooftop rain catchments so that they can at least have some storage of water on their own that they can use not to drink, but for their dishes and cleaning. And they've done it for maybe a few dozen people. They want to do it for everyone if they can prove that it's cost effective, I guess. As part of this story, I interviewed Jenny Kell at University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee. She's the director of the Freshwater Policy Center there. And she made the point that we have, it's in our interest to deal with these faraway places, that water scarcity in South America and Africa and the Middle East may become our problem in ways that we don't predict when there's massive upheaval and people on the move. She also makes the point that we had a hand in the climate change problem, so maybe we also have some responsibility for helping them adapt or helping them with water storage and so on. I have time. Can I show another video here? This one's shorter.
The air's thin, the sun's bright. La Paz, Bolivia is a thriving city on a high plain with its back to the glacier-covered peaks of the Andes Mountains. It's no stranger to water scarcity, and like other places around the globe, the scarcity falls hardest on the poor.
People are just starting to get to know the climate change problem. It's a glacier melting process, those that supply 20% of the water.
At the same time these changes began leaving its mark, La Paz began undergoing another transformation, particularly to one of its suburbs.
El Alto was recognized as a city 30 years ago. Before that, it was only a neighborhood of La Paz. In the decade of the 90s, every year 60,000 people came to El Alto until it came to be the second largest city in the country.
Larger than La Paz itself.
It was one of the highest growth rates in Latin America. The more quantity of population, the more needs of water consumption.
With that ever-dwindling water source.
People are going to have to make some adaptations to the way that they conduct their lives. A big part of adaptation for a lot of these people is migration.
If we had problems with water supply in El Alto, if preventative water measures are not taken, people would be inclined to occupy the areas next to Lake Titicaca.
The largest lake by volume in South America. It's only 40 miles away, but it too is affected by changes with diminishing lake levels.
Because during the dry season, there isn't a lot of fish. When the water decreases, the fish go towards deeper water.
An ancient people known as Euros. Mario and his family live on one of nearly 50 islands made of reeds floating on the lake's surface, sustaining themselves from the fish they catch.
It's part of our culture, part of our lives.
It's an entirely unique and traditional way of life, one that has been going on for hundreds of years.
We worry about the future.
With changes to the lake itself and the potential for a massive migration influx, it's one that could be threatened.
That fisherman, Mario, I wanted to mention, when I said Theresa was a self-starter on this story, she found that guy. If you read the story in the Journal Sentinel, he was prominent in that. And she landed at Lake Titicaca the day before David and I got there, and she found him. So he's more prominent in her story than mine, but I was impressed. And there she is with his fish. This is an out-of-focus photo taken with a camera phone, which is how you can tell I took it. The problems in Bolivia are more dramatic than ours in the urban West, but they're not foreign to us. This is the Navajo Reservation in Arizona, and these people, tens of thousands of people on the Navajo Reservation don't have water, and they used to. They used to have springs near their homes. They used to have streams that flowed year-round. They used to have wells near those streams. And a U.S. Geological Survey researcher that I worked with on this story has been tracking the weather stations there and found that the snowpack on the reservation has declined by 2/3 since the 1930s. And all the reasons we talked about before, the stream's dried up. There's only one stream that flows year-round on the reservation now, and there used to be maybe 100. This is people from the University of Arizona trying to prove a desalination plant, a solar-powered desalination on the reservation that can take deep saltwater aquifers and maybe use. They don't know whether it's cost-effective yet, but just an example of what's happening from the stream beds dried up. Now you've got wind going, you've got dust. In August, we went to California to find out what we could learn from their crisis, which is more advanced than ours, because it's a different story, but the Sierra Nevadas also have the snow issue. And so they're dealing with major problems. And you may have heard that their governor ordered everyone, on average, to cut back by 25%. And so we went and visited and found out how they're doing it. In some places, it's more than that. In Calabasas, just north of Los Angeles, it's based on how much the per-person use of water is, and they had the highest use there, so they had to cut back by 36%. We went to Compton, which is a poorer area, and they had to cut back by like 8% because they were already affected by price increases in water and so on, and they just were letting their lawns go. But I was just astounded at what people, I mean, they did it. It's, they, in a month or two, they cut their water by 36%. And the way they did it was basically just, 2/3 of the water is used outdoors. Now you can't water more than twice a week, and suddenly that's the biggest part of the problem. They also paid, like Los Angeles paid $2 a square foot if you ripped out your lawn, which is a more permanent solution. This is somebody that we visited who's having their backyard swimming pool taken out. They could afford the water. They didn't have to do it, but they kind of had a sense of moral obligation, I guess, So it's kind of incredible what's happened to me, and I think it speaks to what is possible in the rest of the Southwest. This is a fruit farmer in Colorado who installed drip irrigation that used to be flood irrigation for his fruit. Saved 40% water. Cost $3,000 an acre for 80 acres, so it's very expensive. This is that sweet corn king that we talked about on the video. He installed, this isn't drip, but you can't see drip irrigation, so it's underground. But he installed drip irrigation on his corn fields and saved 40 or 45%. Cost him $400,000. But he can afford it because he sells corn. He has kind of like the monopoly on corn at Kroger branded grocery stores nationwide, he and his friends. Most people can't do that. Most farmers can't do that. So again, it's going to take some kind of a pooling of resources between city and farms to make something like that happen. And then finally, there's our behavior and our regulation. This is a patroller in Las Vegas writing a ticket because somebody was watering on the wrong day. And that doesn't happen in Phoenix. It happens in Las Vegas. And they're getting response. We talk to people there and in Los Angeles who will smile when they talk about turning their neighbors in. So people are taking it pretty seriously. I think that's it for me, other than to say that I was telling Herb last night that I've had more direct-to-reader response on this than anything I've done in 25 years, which is surprising to me because water is so kind of dense and mysterious to people. But apparently it's the right time because people are responding. And I think I told you last night that an ex-girlfriend's dad emailed me last week. Somebody from 15 or 17 years ago who lived in Detroit. Now it turns out he lives in Phoenix or in the Phoenix suburbs. He's retired. And he says, "Hey, remember me? I've been reading your stories and I'm not flushing the toilet as much as I used to." So I know we've made some difference.
Any questions, please? So, right, please. One moment, please. Sir?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, California, northern. The number we hear is 20% residential, 80% farming. I know she didn't talk about water usage. Did you get into that at all with your...
About the difference between farming
Well,
and...
the bulk of the water is used by farmers.
Yeah, definitely.
So people cutting back by not flushing toilets and taking Navy showers and not watering their lawns really doesn't add up to a nickel. The big saving... not much water savings.
Yeah.
I mean, to be honest. I mean, we all do. Nobody's flushing toilets. Everybody's warming the bucket up with the water before, so they're not wasting it. But it doesn't add up to much savings.
I mean, my feeling is that California is in such a crisis point that maybe it does matter to them at this moment. But year in and year out, absolutely. That's why I was talking about these pilot programs and transfers where people from the cities start to pay in to try and make farms more efficient.
Right.
To me, that's where the water is. It is. It's where 2/3. It's where 70% of the water is. Maybe in California, it's more than 70.
I say 80. Yeah.
But that's where you have to look. I mean, they're also creating a desalination plant on the coast, and there's all kinds of smaller solutions, but yes, all the water is in agriculture, so there's going to have to be some kind of understanding, some kind of money put into making farming more efficient.
I've read a lot of your coverage, and I might have missed some of it for sure along the way, but are you dealing with it all getting into the politics? I mean, the pressure, is the political pressure? Is there, what groups? I mean, is it because going up against big agriculture obviously is a huge political challenge. So where are the pressures? And, if you're getting all the folks that are emailing you, are they also emailing their legislators? And is there a movement, a global movement, local? Is it just piecemeal by municipalities?
Yeah. I don't think there is. I mean, the California story is we felt like we had to go to California. So California may have their own internal movement. I don't think in the Southwest there really is. There's starting to be an awareness, basically. And part of the deal is that when we didn't need to use everything that we got from the Colorado River for years. We haven't yet. So we would take the excess and dump it in the desert underground. And so once the restrictions start for us out of Lake Mead, they figure there's about 10 years worth of supply in the ground. It's kind of a buffer for us, And so when the recession hit, the state of Arizona slashed their Department of Water Resources. All the experts, all the people who negotiate these things, and they haven't restored it yet. So that, to me, that's kind of a measure of where we are. There's an understanding that this is a problem, but I don't think there's action yet, really.